Hello, I'm Duncan Elkinson, your host for Dateline USA. And today, it's major flashback time, all you hippies. We're going back to the 60s and 70s in our radical roots and talking about Made in LA, the peace posters. I'm here today with Carol Wells and Henry Klein. Welcome to Dateline.
Thank you for having us.
Carol Wells is an art historian and an artist who has since the early 80s been collecting graphics, peace graphics, poster art. How did you get started?
Well, actually, as an art historian, I was very involved with art, obviously, but I'd been since high school a political activist. But I never put the two together. I never liked posters. I wasn't interested in posters. So that's the confession part of this interview. But in 1981, I went to Nicaragua as part of the solidarity work that I was doing and saw how they were using posters. And I got that proverbial light bulb or the aha moment. I said, that's how political posters work, because it worked on me down there. So 1981 is when I started collecting posters.
How marvelous. And with us is Henry Klein, art professor and historian, and part of Peace Press. Henry teaches at LA Valley College and is in charge of their gallery.
Correct.
And in the late 70s actually worked at Peace Press.
Right.
Welcome to Dateline.
Thanks.
Carol, tell us about the Center for the Study of Political Graphics.
Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, I started collecting posters in 1981, although actually I made my first poster at Peace Press in 1979. So there's an earlier connection with Peace Press. And by the late 80s, I had done several different exhibits. Different people, universities had been asking me to do exhibits once they knew I had this massive posters. And I decided I tried to find someplace else that was doing what I was doing because it was starting to become overwhelming. I had 3,000 posters under my bed. And turned out that there really was no place that was collecting posters and exhibiting them to do educational work. So friends said, well, why don't you just start one and be careful what you wish for. I didn't realize, 16 years later and more than 50,000 posters later, that we would become the largest human rights and protest poster collection in the entire United States.
An incredible
post-World War II. Post-World War II
incredible
emphasis.
resource.
It's an amazing resource. There's the poster in the United States is not given as much respect as it is in Europe and Latin America, which is another reason I think that it's been so incredibly challenging for us to get funding, but also to get people to look at this as an art form. But as you look at these posters, they very clearly are an art form.
Yes. And in fact, Henry, tell us about Peace Press. How and why did the Peace Press get started?
Well, I sort of came into Peace Press in its middle age, 1976.
And how long had it been going at that time?
It had been going since 1967. And in the beginning, it had a rather crude impulse, which was simply, we got a message and we've got to get it out now, immediately. Crank up the mimeograph machines, and they were literally hand-cranked mimeograph machines, type stencils. We couldn't talk about art. We're just talking about information and getting it out on the streets, mostly of Westwood at that time, because the people who created Peace Press in the beginning were largely connected with UCLA.
All right, who were some of those folks?
The founders, probably the principal one, is a guy by the name of Jerry Palmer, and he was a physics student at UCLA, actually thrown out of UCLA while he was a candidate for a PhD in physics. And he was active in the SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society. There was Bob Zah, another UCLA student, and Bob was active in the Resistance, which was a group of radical draft resistors, or non-cooperators, basically, as Bob described it, a group of people with a one-way ticket to jail because they refused to cooperate with what was then the ongoing system of drafting young people into the military and the Vietnam War, which was at the center of that at that particular time. So they were making moral protests, nonviolent protests, and Bob was the first one who didn't go to jail through just a quirk in some respects. He expected to go to jail, but they told him that he had to do alternative service. He said, I am doing alternative service. I'm printing at Peace Press for every organization that's seeking to end the direction in which this government is going in. And the judge let him go, which is a really wonderful story.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
What was it like? What were their facilities like? What were their capabilities?
In the beginning, very minimal. They were, a small room or a suite of rooms with very crude equipment. Mm-hmm. And by the time I arrived, that had changed, and Peace Press had professionalized. In the beginning, nobody worked for any money at all, and they worked long hours, mm-hmm. and they didn't have particular skills. They had to teach themselves everything. By the time I arrived, I was somebody with a Master of Fine Arts degree and a graphic artist, and somebody with some very specific commercial skills that I could use in a facility that now had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment.
Really?
Big presses, printed books, printed posters. And a decision had been made before I arrived there to make it work as a business so that the money, the profit from that business, was not distributed to shareholders. It was plowed back into the support of the political causes to which the members of that collective were dedicated. So for me, it was a redemptive enterprise. I had been a political activist. I had done lots of anti-war art during 1965 to 68 when I was in graduate school. And finally, I had a chance to come back to that sense of purpose. And it really helped to put my life back on track, mm-hmm. And redirect it at those things that I think were really important in life.
What a fascinating aspect of your resume, Professor. Do your students know?
I out myself a lot these
Wonderful.
days.
Carol, why now? Why do a show on Peace Press now?
Well, in many ways, the political climate is comparable to what it was in the Vietnam War. In fact,
Tell me.
In the repression that's coming out there, in the punishment for people for being too overt in their opposition to the war, mm-hmm. for the marginalization of people, for expressing their views, and for the fairly uniform presentation in the corporate press. There needs to be an outlet for letting people know it was like this before, and this is how we organized against it then, and take some inspiration and do it a new way now, because there's new mediums out there, internet being a crucial new one that didn't exist then. But
are we seeing political art on the internet?
Extraordinary outpouring of political art on the internet. In fact, there's really a two-way, there's more political posters being done now, and partially it's because of the internet, and partially because it's the war in Iraq. Usually crises like wars result in more posters being created, more political graphics being created. But when you have the internet and you can have people sharing graphics around the world in literally moments,
yes,
that inspires people to make more posters, but it also inspires people to download them and put them on a piece of paper, because you can't walk around, you can't walk in a demonstration with a computer terminal, with a monitor. You can't stick a monitor in your window unless you don't want to use it, after that.
It's amazing during the last election how many graphics came across my desk.
And there was something interesting on the ones on the computer. They would say, this is copyright free as long as you're using it for free. Mm-hmm. If you want to make money off of it, you need to ask our permission. But we are, no copyright on any of these images that, specific websites, if you want to use it for mm-hmm. promoting the cause.
How different from the days when you're doing hand lithographed posters of limited runs.
Well, even at Peace Press, I said to you earlier, Peace Press in a way is the last gasp of the age of mechanical reproduction. And we had to learn and become skilled technicians at that point in time to really do anything effectively. But right now, I can type it in, play with the fonts, throw in some images, and print it off of my laser printer at home. Every single person is, in fact, a printing press. Mm-hmm. And that's a distributive environment on a scale that we've never seen before. So that it's high-speed communication, it's the instantaneous gratification, if you will, with respect to the ideas that you have, because you don't have to wait and go through such an arduous chain of activities from the conception to the delivery end, coming off the press and the distribution. It's all rolled up into one.
Sure, it's a global village.
But there's one addendum to that, is every person is a printing press if you have access to a computer, if you have access to the internet. There's certainly millions of people, even in this country, that don't have access to both, and that's where the poster comes in. Because the poster then is really the most democratic of all art forms, because you don't need to have that technological access. You can just, there's a piece of paper. It's there for you to just take, or even just to see. You post a poster on a wall, people driving by, walking by, they're confronted with that image without going out of their way to see it. They didn't have to go to a museum to see it. Because museums and websites, they're really self-selecting. You want to see the image. You want to go out of your way to find the image. Whereas posters, they're just put art on the streets.
Wonderful.
In a very guerrilla context.
What is the relationship of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics with Peace Press?
Well, personally, as I mentioned earlier, I actually made a poster there in 1979. So that was an early incarnation.
Did you know Henry then?
I didn't know Henry then.
Actually, we did know each other.
We did?
Because of my connection to UCLA.
Okay, I did know Henry then. And then the organization I mentioned, this Nicaragua Task Force, used to have their printing done at Peace Press. Because this was all the time when people say labor donated on the bottom of their literature. And someone let me know that, that's just a way of saying, I really know I should have it printed at a union shop, but I'm too cheap to do it. So the task force took that as seriously, and so we went out of our way to have cost more money, but we had our things printed at the union shop, which was Peace Press.
Well, and that particular poster, which I have a copy of, and I'm wondering whether I got it at that time, because it was right at the end of 1979 when I finished my tenure at Peace Press.
It was done in August.
Well, I would have still been at Peace Press.
July or August in 79.
Yeah, so I may have gotten it right there at that time. So we have those kinds of connections. But in fact, the Peace Press did that not just for the Center for the Study of Political Graphics, but the entire spectrum of every radical organization across Southern California during the whole period of its tenure.
Was it a unique print shop?
For Southern California it was, but there were other shops like that across the country. In New York.
Were they modeled after other print shops? Or were they a model for the print shops?
Well, both. There was an interplay. Actually, some of even the personnel flowed between those shops. There was a shop in San Francisco. One of the colleagues who helped organize this show came from a shop in New York and then came out to California and helped with the organization of Peace Press. So there was a lively interchange, and very often, and there are some things in this exhibition right now that were images that were reproduced and reprinted at all of these different places across the country.
Is Your Bathroom Breeding Bolsheviks?
Is Your Bathroom Breeding Bolsheviks was a classic image of that sort.
But there was also, I think, the motivation to start presses for the same reason Peace Press started, because people were organizing against the war, and the print shops that existed in their community literally refused to print anything that was against the war. So that was a real need. There was a need for print shops in Chicago, for example, Salcedo Press, or in, I know Inkworks was a little bit later, but in Berkeley.
Right.
So there's these presses all over the country that some of them don't still exist. They no longer exist, but some of them, as Salcedo, still does exist.
Does Peace Press?
Peace Press ended in 1987, but one of the things I was going to say just about that thing, it's really worth saying to an audience now what it was like to try and get something printed in those days, because one, you had people who absolutely wouldn't print for you because you were clearly subversives and anti the government. And when you found somebody who was willing to print for you, the full force of the establishment, and that meant police and firemen and sometimes the FBI would come around Police and fire would close shops. They would say, if you continue to print for those guys, we're going to find 100 fire violations in your establishment and put you out of business. So it took bringing printing into their own hands for a radical movement to get their word out on the street, because they were shut down in terms of their access to the media. They were repressed by the government. The kind of thing that people are afraid of right now because of the Patriot Act. It gives the very long arm of the law an even longer arm to make those kinds of decisions and shut down those kinds of enterprises.
Mm-hmm. Is there a place for a peace press today? Or has the internet taken all of that away? Has digital graphics?
Well, we still have things certainly printed at union shops, and there's several union shops in Los Angeles that will print it, which certainly that wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think and LA has probably fewer union shops than some other major cities. So union shops are not really a big thing in Los Angeles, but New York has them. I mean, they're really in throughout the country. So I think it's a combination now of mm-hmm. people having greater access to printing themselves, and more availability of union shops.
Okay. Harold, tell us about some of the other shows that the Center for the Study of Political Graphics has mounted and how they tour.
They tour all over the world, actually. Right now we have a show in Vienna, and some of our posters are in Sweden. We had an anti-war show that it was in Sweden in November of last year. It opened in Santa Monica in 2003, just before the Iraq War started. Mm-hmm. So that's a topical show. That's a show that we had 1 month from idea to opening because it was like an emergency. So we do the emergency shows.
And how many posters do you normally
in a show?
Send to a show?
That one had 120, but
wow.
That's a big show. Normally we try to keep our shows to about 80. Mm-hmm. Then we do shows, for example, on gentrification and homelessness. We have one called We Shall Not Be Moved that's traveled around the country. Mm-hmm. We have one on immigrant rights called No Human Being is Illegal. On women's rights, Women Hold Up Half the Sky. Mm-hmm. We have a farm worker show called Viva la Huelga, Long Live the Strike.
Mm-hmm. What about Earth, Wind, and Solar?
That's an incredible show on the ecology movement, and that's opened in Northridge a couple of years ago. So that was its premiere was in Northridge.
Right. And Solidarity Forever?
That's international labor posters.
How far back do you date?
That one goes back, well, there's a few from the 20s.
Wow.
The Center for the Study of Political Graphics archive actually goes back to 1900, but the bulk of our collection is 1960s to the present. Mm-hmm. And then for the labor show, there are really a few earlier ones. Primarily, most of them are post-World War II.
And Courageous Voices?
That's kind of our, a little bit of everything. It's racism, sexism, and human rights. So that's the one that almost changes every time we put it out, depending on what the host really wants to emphasize. So it's actually also one of the most popular exhibits we have.
And these travel from campus to campus?
Primarily campuses, but also museums, galleries, community galleries. The Courageous Voices one was interesting when they had some anti-Semitic and racist hate crimes going on in Pomona. I think it was a year or two ago. They called us up and said, can you give us that exhibit next week? And so it was kind of being able to turn that quickly to be able to put something responding to what their need was.
Oh, marvelous. And the Peace Press show is where now?
Right now it's at Los Angeles Valley College, which is in what used to be Van Nuys, but we keep changing those names, so now it's Valley Glen. Same place.
How pretty.
Just real estate that's a few tens of thousands more expensive because of the change in the name. But Valley College is one of the 9 campuses of the Los Angeles Community College District, and one of the larger ones of the campuses. Pierce College, Valley College, City College, Trade Tech, East Los Angeles, probably the largest campuses in the district. We have an art gallery in the art building on our campus, and we've just renovated that space. So this is the first show that really uses that newly renovated facility with great lighting, a great system for hanging things, security, and the like. It's been long in the coming, and I'm really delighted. that we actually have that show in place at this
How many
point in time.
posters did you include?
We have about 112.
Plus the vitrines.
And we have glassed-in cases with an enormous amount of unique memorabilia related to the very beginnings of the press and
Such
letters.
as?
Oh, the wonderful letters. The very first thing that Jerry Palmer did was to market peace stickers. Market is probably not the appropriate word.
$1 bought you how many? 100?
Well, we have these letters. There are a number of series of letters, and they say things like, "Enclosed is my check for $1 for 50 peace stickers." And they said things like, "Make
They
love."
might have at least sent a stamp.
Yeah, make love, not war, and other related
But
kinds of
posters
things.
were not the primary thing the Peace Press printed. So there were books and magazines, and the literature that they printed are in the cases as well.
We have that in there. I think a little over 50 books were published by Peace Press, and it was the alternative everything press of Los Angeles. So there are books on solar energy, on wind-generated electricity, electric vehicles. There's a book that
All quite topical now.
very topical now, and they were done in the 70s.
Yeah.
We published Timothy Leary. We published Dina Metzger. We published some of what I would describe as alternative education books, Child's Play and What is a Girl and What is a Boy. Very simple kinds of things that allowed parents to engage in a simple discussion about sexual difference with young children without providing them with excessive amounts of information. Just enough to let them know there's a difference. And those are kinds of topics that were taboo at a certain point in time. We published a lot of work for Howard Fast, a book on Buddhist meditations for him. We published, I think, one of the most ambitious projects that was going on when I came there in 1976 was a book called Power of the People. And this was a complete history of the nonviolent movements in the United States.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's a wonderful book.
Right.
We have a history, and it goes back
And I'm glad it's been saved.
to Native Americans, even before the time of the conquests.
Now, I'm here with two artists and art historians, and we've been talking about the politics of printing, poster graphics, peace posters. Now I want to talk about art. Am I looking at art when I look at these posters, Carol?
Absolutely.
Tell me why.
Well, first of all art is political, but not all art is overtly political. So the posters that we collect are overtly political. And so really there's one of the distinctions between the kind of art you would see that it would be considered high art is that it's most high art is not overtly political, with some extraordinary exceptions. And I'm really talking about, from the end of the 20th century, from the time that art for art's sake was in vogue. Prior to that, there was no such thing as non-political art. It was all, from the pyramids to the cathedrals to what was commissioned by the kings and the emperors, was all putting them, their positions, their political ideology was justifying it. So political art was absolutely not in anything contradictory prior to art for art's sake, which was
so Henry, after the cause has passed, is the art still there?
Well, I think that we can learn from that material on many different levels.
Do you take your students to study the art of the
I
poster?
absolutely do. I absolutely do. In this show, there are some pieces that are just exquisitely designed. If we wanted to look at them in the context of pure abstraction and talk about composition, we can.
Really?
We can talk about, but one of the things that art is always about is visual communication, and the communication is either effective or it is not effective on the basis of that graphic design, and that's a difference between good and bad quality. Absolutely. So we can talk about a science of visual communication that brings its way into the making of works of art.
How great, because now the capitalist me comes out, I think it's highly collectible.
Well, there's a problem with us because people have been donating. Almost, I would say, 95% of the collection that we have has been donated. And that's actually how we're starting to work with the...
That may taper off if these things go to auction now.
With Peace Press. Well, that's already starting. I mean, eBay has a lot of political posters and other places as well. But we are the archive for Peace Press.
Thank you for being with us today. Thank you so much for bringing this important message back and these wonderful memories back. I want to thank Carol Wells from the Center of the Study of Political Graphics and Professor Henry Klein from Los Angeles Valley College for being with us today to talk about Made in L.A.,
Thanks.
The Art of the Peace Press. Thank you so much for being here. This has been wonderful. We have to do another show.
The